to Ariella on the Go. I'm Ariella. I'm always on the go. And this is my YouTube channel. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. Today we're going to be reading Decolonizing Sport. And so this is going to be another reading vlog. So Decolonizing Sport is about the stories of sport colonizing indigenous peoples and of indigenous peoples using sport to decolonize. So when we say sports, they are talking about sports, hockey, football, soccer, those types of sports. I have an ARC, so it means advanced reading copy. Usually they send these ones out to people to read them before, and then maybe if something's wrong with it, the author will change it, make final revisions, and then publish it. So I've read a few of these before. So as you can see, this is my e-arc, and we do not have the pretty cover. It just says Decolonizing Sport, and that makes me very sad. Because e-copy that I've been given. So I have an ARC, so it means advanced reading copy. Usually they send these ones out to people to read them before, and then maybe if something's wrong with it, the author will change it, make final revisions, and then publish it. So I've read a few of these before. So let's read 25 pages, and then I'll give you an update on what's going on. Okay, so I'm reading the kind of intro to the book. This is chapter 1, but it's really more of an intro. What it says is, each of the chapters in this book addresses indigenous sport history from a decolonial approach and shows us how the past connects to the present, while also highlighting the important work yet to be done. And some of the words that I read were settler colonialism and colonialism. And fun fact, there's a difference between the two. Colonialism, although done mostly by settlers, is not settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is when Settler colonialism is a form of exogenous domination that involves the removal and erasure of indigenous peoples in order to take the land for use by settlers. And that's what settler colonialism is, according to learningforjustice.org. And colonialism is just kind of a more general term. It's a practice of domination that involves the subjugation of one people to another. That's the little thing. And I also learned a new word. Well, not a new word, but it's the Maori name for New Zealand, which is Aotearoa. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it was mentioned in the book because, of course, there are indigenous people in New Zealand as well, and they didn't refer to it as New Zealand, so that's that's a new word for me. I like learning just like the indigenous words. Anyway, that's kind of what the intro about this book says. And yeah. Okay, so I haven't read quite 25 pages, but there's still like a lot to just go through. Also, my computer kind of about to die, so I think this will be like all I can film today. So what this is saying is one of the issues so far is the fact that like indigenous lands are being used for sport without like indigenous permission. I think that's the right word. But it's just that like things are not being like consulted. They're not being like asked like, is this okay? Like, because I mean it is like, you know. Also, just one of the things that is said on page 14 is that although national and international treaties and agreements protecting the legal rights of the indigenous people exist in Canada, through the hosting of the Olympic Games, unceded indigenous territories become exploited for development and resource extraction. That's kind of part of what like the whole thing is about. But it's also about how the issue of the indigenous and sports has been going on for a very long time. So like when you go back to the days of when settlers were coming to America for free land, of course that was never really anyone's to give away except for the indigenous people who originally lived on it. When the settlers came, it changed a lot of things for the indigenous, and the indigenous were forced to adapt to it. And you know, many Europeans came and they wanted to hunt and they wanted to fish, and they would employ the indigenous men to show them where to hunt or to fish. And that was also like a good source of income for them. So it was kind of like, that was the way of how they had to adapt to like sports that were put there by colonialism, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I worded that correctly, but that's what happened. Also just nowadays, or I guess mostly like before, indigenous also, they were allowed to participate in sports, but they just didn't get as much recognition as whoever the white person was, you know? They would just kind of, they wouldn't get any like glory or whatever. They would just kind of be there. Yeah, so that's really all that I've like read so far, but currently as I'm reading it, there's also some stuff about the Aboriginal people in Australia, and you know how they've gone through similar situations, and how they've had to appropriate European sports for their own needs, and had to also adapt to this new wave of people with a completely different culture coming in to their country and trying a little bit to So yeah, that's what I've read so far. Okay, my leg is asleep and like everything hurts, but that's fine. So where did I leave off? I took notes, okay? So there was a story about Brian Rice. This book has multiple authors, by the way. So Brian Rice wrote a story about discrimination that he faced when going into sports as like a young, just like a young boy, like a kid. And he's saying on how French and or Canadians are more prioritized than people who are indigenous. He's also saying how it was unfair for him because the teams in with the teams in his area, you would mostly get in based on skill and talent, and their main purpose, like his main purpose, was just to participate and have fun, and that's part of the indigenous values, is just to participate and have fun. So, you know, but the people who were in charge of the sports team, like actually like based it on whether or not like you're a good player, and that you have whether or not you're a good player and if you can win or not, which is like crazy because like they're just kids and it's just a school game. Or I don't know, it wasn't very clear to me as I was reading if it was like a school game or not, but it was one of those. But in the end, he grew up, he became a teacher, and now he coaches and he gives all of the kids a fair chance, which is really nice to see. And it is very loud outside. Sorry. So there was also some mention of, you know, as I said, the values of the Anishinaabe. I think that's how you pronounce it. I couldn't find a pronunciation guide. I'm so sorry. But there were some of their values, their teachings, and what a hunter and a leader are supposed to look like, which I thought was really cool. There are also a lot of fables and their morals and their stories, their teachings, and I really like that. I really like reading about that, especially in this book because, you know, it's mostly about sports, but it's nice to have like a fable every now and then, which I appreciated. I was pleasantly surprised. And so the fable's meaning was that everyone has a gift, even those who are less skilled than others. I thought that was very impactful, and I thought that was nice. There's also just a lot of definitions in here, like the Mohawk word for I love you, which is Konarongwa. I think that's how you pronounce it. Again, no clue where I'm supposed to find a pronunciation guide. I tried Googling it, okay, listen. I tried, but I didn't find it. There's also the bone carriers, who are like thing in like indigenous values. I think that's the right word. basically, like, knowledge is like the bones of their ancestors. They don't deteriorate. Instead, the bones carry and retain the ancestral knowledge, and that's cool. And this might sound a little bit weird, but I like the indigenous views on death. It's weird, but I like them, okay? I read Sacred Space by Brian J. Francis. Highly recommend, by the way. 5 stars. It was a beautiful book. And I read that, and it was about just indigenous beliefs, what happens after you die, where you go, what happens. And I loved it because, like, I'm Christian, and I know that I shouldn't be afraid of death, but, like, the way that the indigenous present it is, it just makes it feel all the less terrifying, and I'm all for that, okay? I'm all for making it less scary. Because, like, it scares me a little bit, okay? Just like the process. The process of dying scares me a little bit. Cause, like, I don't know what happens is the thing. No one's ever just, like, come back to life and just been like, hey, here's what happens, you know? So there's also a little bit about the indigenous people of Kenya, like just a little bit of a story, but I really liked it. It was cool. There's also a Bigfoot mention, and if just maybe you've noticed this little sticker that I have on my computer. It says Florida. It says Bigfoot hunting lifetime permit. So I'm a little bit of a fan of Bigfoot. And I like this. They call him Sabi. I think that's how you pronounce it, or maybe it's Sabi. And yeah, I liked it. Like how, like their word for it is just really cool, and I like Bigfoot. Bigfoot's pretty cool, guys. Y'all should believe in Bigfoot, because why not? I wonder if there's a Bigfoot religion. I feel like there is. Then lacrosse. Lacrosse is based off of an indigenous story, or at least like a fable or something. Maybe lacrosse was the inspiration. I don't know. Lacrosse and indigenous stories are like connected and related in this way. All right, another day, another time, another bit of reading, Decolonizing Sport. So, I was reading where I left off was the storytelling unit, and there was the whole thing. Actually, no, that's wrong. I left off on the topic of indigenous mascots in sports, and so I was reading that the boys team were called the Warriors, and the girls team was called the Squaws, which is a slur. Yeah. So I just read the section on mostly like just on indigenous mascots and the writer's experiences with them, and wow, just wow. I don't know if I'm not gonna talk about it because like you need to read this for yourself. Yeah, but I will say though, the thing with the indigenous mascots and names is that they're just being done wrong. Sure, the name of whichever tribe that is native to that land is being celebrated, but the indigenous athletes that are partaking in the sport are not being celebrated. The next section is the nature of archives, and this is like about the residential schools more and what went on there. So like it's really so bad what the indigenous kids were forced into doing, and like this facade they were made to uphold, and there was so much abuse that happened, and everyone either just like went the other way and didn't care about it. So that's really sad, and like it's such a powerful story of how much people were lied to, and believing that the indigenous kids were being treated right at the residential schools, and there's like what the kids were being told was that they were privileged because they're getting an education, they're getting like they're having this privileged life, and that being privileged is a good thing. Like they should be proud in a sense, and yeah. And they're just trying so hard to show that the indigenous kids were being treated right at these schools, and to show everything that was happening at the residential schools in like this really positive light, and really it's not like that at all. And one of the ways that they would trick people into believing that the residential schools were treating them well is through hockey, through like promotional photos in sports, and just kind of showing them off like their little hockey teams and what they're doing, like, oh, look at all this equipment that they have that they can use, and like we put so much money into their sports, and this is what they're doing, and they're all having fun, but really it's all a lie. Yeah, so that's that section. I'm gonna read another 25 pages or so, and then I'll report back. Okay, guys, there's been a fun little thing that's happened to me. Um, my phone I'm like locked out of my Apple ID on my phone, so that's fun. Not really, because now I can't film and read at the same time. So I have to film on my computer, and yeah. So I'll have to like come back every so few pages and say things. I'm sorry for the camera quality because it's gone down a little bit, but it's still fine. You can still see me. Okay, so where I left off last time was on this new chapter of the absence of indigenous moving bodies, and this one was an interesting chapter. Not quite sure what like indigenous bodies means. I think there could have been more explanation on that part. Um, it's just, when you're reading like these books, it's like stuff that you're not familiar with just kind of like pops up, and you're like, you kind of just go along with it. There's not a whole lot of that in this book, but just a little bit of it. um, so yeah, so the author, Malcolm McLean, chose to capitalize words like white and like whiteness and kind of like just like as a race as a whole. I thought that was really interesting. That was like a passing kind of sentence and paragraph, but I thought it was interesting. It's just like his personal like beliefs and kind of values, I guess. So that was interesting to me. Um, and there's also a mention of colonial nationalism, which is like when back in the day, like the white people tried to make it so that they were indigenous to the land, kind of thing. Like when the settlers first came, like they're indigenous settlers because they were there first and that stuff. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the next part of the story is the Rights and Reconciliation Unit. And the next chapter is using Wikipedia for Sport Reconciliation by Victoria Parashka. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. But it was really interesting on how like Wikipedia is kind of doing like the indigenous people dirty, because like just kind of not giving them the credit that they should get in Wikipedia articles, and just not having as many articles in general. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Just like what should have been in the articles, and then just like what wasn't. So it's like a hangnail. That was interesting. I like that. But yeah, the moral of that one was kind of like, or I guess I should say, the takeaway was that indigenous athletes don't really get that much recognition in Wikipedia either, and that's also really sad. like mostly white athletes will get credit and people are more interested in like white athletes. And yeah, it's just a really interesting study and kind of deep dive into that. I love how like all of these are like deep dives into just like something that's not like super big, I would say. Like, I mean, it is big and it is a big deal to a lot of people, but I would say that like when you think of like decolonization and indigenous rights, sports aren't usually the top priority. I mean, it's usually like rights and maybe feminism, maybe. But you know, it's really nice to just see like all of this sports stuff because I'm learning a lot and I'm appreciating all of it. So yeah, that's what I have to say about this section.
I'm just gonna make a part 2 because otherwise this video will be 1 hour long.